Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Our sessions at this conference are quite short, so I'm particularly keen that we try and start relatively on time. We've got a lot of ground to cover. I've got a fabulous collection of incisive and witty and thoughtful analysts on the stage with me for the session on global trade, avoiding the backlash against the new investors. Joining me on the podium this morning are, first of all, well known to many of you, I'm sure, Commissioner Neelie Kroes from the European Commission in Brussels, and a distinguished former professor of economics, I should point out, so that when we kind of get into the finer points of the world trading system, she and the person to her immediate left, Jean-Pierre Lehmann, can swap theses. Jean-Pierre is Professor of International Political Economy at IMD in Switzerland. On Jean-Pierre's left, Kevin Watts, Vice Chairman of Merrill Lynch & Co., now based in Hong Kong, graduated from Oxford University and with degree in PPE in 1972, as did I, though not in PPE, same year. And then finally, on my far right, Khalid Abdulla-Janahi, Chairman of the Executive Committee of the Shamil Bank of Bahrain and Vice Chairman of the Arab Business Council. So we've got a terrific geographical spread. We have academics, we have distinguished representatives of international government in the form of the Commissioner, and we have business leaders. Jean-Pierre, let me start with you. Not long ago, this summer, you sent out a note to some of your colleagues in which you said roundly and without equivocation that the Doha round of trade talks were dead. Elaborate on that a little bit. Give us a very quick sense of what you think the key implications are of saying that Doha is dead, and then I want to ask the other three panelists whether they agree with your burial of Doha. Jean-Pierre.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me first say that insofar as the title is concerned, the title is Avoiding the Backlash. Well, the backlash is here. Right. I don't think one should be trying, speaking about avoiding it, perhaps trying to mitigate or whatever, but there is a very major backlash that is occurring. I was pleased to hear in the session this morning on the world economy confirmation that while the economy is doing beautifully, the systemic underpinnings of the global economy is very fragile, and I think there is, we are seeing this resurgence of protectionism and nationalism, both in respect to the new players, whether they are new global trading players, new investors, or indeed to new instruments. I declared Doha dead in 2004, after Cancun, when it was clearly not being revived in a proper fashion. Of course, the burial rites are taking a long time, and I think there are also attempts to try and sort of revive the thing, get some miracles done. I don't see any prospect whatsoever under the current circumstances of this actually taking place. Doha is dead, and we should recognize that it's dead, recognize that we failed miserably to live up to the expectations of a sort of new order for the new environment that we're in. I think the consequences of it are extremely serious. They're serious not so much necessarily in terms of the technicalities of Doha, but more for the signal that it sends out and the symbolism. After all, what we're talking about in Doha is relatively small beer, so far as the challenges of the world economy, the world environment, the world geopolitical system, etc. If we cannot cooperate on something which is relatively minor, how the hell are we going to cooperate in terms? So I think it's a breakdown of cooperation, it's a breakdown of trust. I think by and large now we're tending not to pay too much attention to it. Again, for something that was being said this morning, is that there's an air of complacency. And the air of complacency is understandable in view of how well the global economy is performing. So perhaps as a non-controversial, non-provocative statement, I might leave it at that for the time being.
Nelly, do you agree? Is the view from Brussels that this round of trade talks I probably shouldn't entirely put you on the spot in this way, but I mean, do you concede, as Jean-Pierre argues, that the momentum to conclude a major round of trade talks has pretty much ended now?
Mike, the answer is no. It is not a very smart remark to be made by Jean-Philippe, and I'm expecting from a professor a more clever answer, so to say. Why? Because we are still negotiating. Never ever give up before the final phase. It isn't yet the final phase. And everyone, all the countries, all the members involved in this process are keeping their cards on the breast. That having been said, we, the Forum, and all those who are thinking of the most important part that we need to face, globalization, and we need rules and regulations on that, need to do their activity in just pushing all those politicians that are involved in this process. And then we need to show flexibility, no doubt about that. And I'm absolutely aware, and the European Commission is very much involved. It's not an easy job, so that is what I agree. But being in the line of Doha is that. You can't be dead and alive. So that is that. And then you should stop the discussions nowadays. We shouldn't. We have the responsibility, and we should indeed ask all those important partners in the game to be a bit more flexible. We, the European Commission, the European Union, is flexible, and we were flexible. Peter Mandelson did an excellent job. He was moving. The United States are now in the game to move, as well as also the People's Republic of China. So let's wait. We badly need such a Doha round with a positive result, and it's not too late.
So the body is not stone cold yet. There's a little,
not at all, not at all.
Little bit of warmth.
Well,
in the,
we all are aware. You never ever dealt with a position that you are putting your cards at the table before the end and say it's done.
Khalid, you come from one of the areas of the world that are new actors, that have kind of new visibility, that have new interests in the world global trading system. How crucial is it for the new investors, for the new players, to have a sense that global trade talks continue going forward, that the world trading system remains open, that it doesn't splinter into a series of little preferential deals here and there?
Okay. Just before I answer that, I've learned one thing during my life, is not to question politicians nor academicians. So I would disagree with both Jean-Pierre and Dalian, that I think actually Doha round, before even it started, it was dead.
Okay.
Politicians will carry on discussing and we get nowhere. So discussion is infinite and we get nowhere in terms of this globalization issue that we're talking about.
Stillborn, you might
but still.
Right.
Coming back to your question, and looking at basically the Gulf states today, I mean, the money flow which is coming out because of the oil and the boom which we have and the new petrodollars, and it's looking for basically investment avenues. Most of it is invested in the local market, but a lot of it is going out. And what we see actually, the protectionism, I mean, there is a lot of big talk about come and invest. This morning actually I was listening to in the discussion, China is open for trade. Everybody wants to come to China. Everybody wants to invest in China. But once you come in, God help you in terms of the protectionism. And since I'm saying China, I would say the same thing about India. India has the same boat again. I mean, to get in and to do business from outside is not that easy. So there is protectionism, a big time. I would not go with Bill Rhodes about nationalism, because I think I disagree with that, because protectionism comes from the elites, from the politicians, and the elites at the top doing business. The rest of us, who are basically the rest of the population, I think Martin was alluding towards that at the end, that there is lack of the money is one place whilst the others are suffering, and I think that's a very, very important thing. So I fully disagree with Bill with regards to nationalism. But I think I would like to bring a point in where we see a lot of cynicism from the other side. I think P&O last year was a very good example. Dubai ports trying to get in, and the way the US, basically, the senators, stopped it happening. That's a very good example where we want to get in, and we want to go to the new, taking the globalization to its end from our part of the world, and we've been basically stopped doing that. The worst part of that, and I don't want to be cynical, I know I'm on the record, but the worst part of that is actually when the Dubai ports, because to make it easier to get in, they said none of the people who are managing it are Arabs, they're actually all British and American. Actually, I take that as an insult to us who come from our part of the world. So I think there is a lot of this business of, yes, we are open, but in reality we are not that open.
And so, Kevin, I'm sorry, Helen. Kevin, you were saying to me that you see a rise in, I don't know whether one should really call it nationalism, but in terms of the defense of national interests in the economic sphere, not just in something like the P&O deal or the CNUC case, the CNUC Unical case of a couple of years ago, but the growth of sovereign wealth funds and things like that.
Well, I think, as ever, the position is complicated, Michael, and I do think it's worth reminding ourselves of how much the world has benefited from the free trade, the growth of free trade in the last 2 decades. And in fact, when I was chatting with the Commissioner beforehand, we were talking about how Europe had developed a free trade area in the last 30 years since I used to go to Brussels for the British government. Huge progress that's been made. So I don't think we, in being aware of the protectionist trends that we're seeing at the moment, I think we do need to see it in the context of the huge achievements of the last 2 decades. And in a sense, that's where some of the complacency comes from that Martin Wolf spoke about. I think the challenge of sovereign wealth funds, which are not new, sovereign wealth funds go back. I think the Kuwaitis were probably the first. Right. 1960, I think the Kuwait Investment Fund was set up. I was bragging about how open the UK was, and it was pointed out to me that there was some concern under Margaret Thatcher with the Kuwait investment in BP. The issue with sovereign wealth funds, I think, is that these investors are not necessarily the same as private sector investors. Right. So I think, to me, what we need to understand is what is valid about the protectionist argument, if you like. All of us, I think, are instinctive free trade people. Right. But it's no good dismissing arguments that have some validity. And the fact is, the pure neoliberal classical model assumes private sector profit maximizing or constituency benefiting, maximizing entities, economic entities. And sovereign wealth funds are not necessarily that. Right. So I think you need to address those issues and put them on the table. So the emphasis on transparency, right, on objectives, on governance of those funds are critical if they're to be treated as in the same way as any other economic agent.
And if you think back to the CNUC Unical case, those were actually the issues. I mean, they may have been dressed up. There may have been some hypocrisy, if you like, in the position that was taken in the American political arena. But those were some of the issues that were raised. Nelly, you wanted to come in, and then I want to bring Jean-Pierre back in a second.
Yes, in my opinion, and talking about competition policy, that is the key part of every overall economic and industrial policy. And let's be open to each other. Open markets with free competition should be, and in fact are, anyhow in my opinion, the predominant forces determining companies' investment decisions. That having been said, and rightly mentioned that example of P&O, in Europe with the one internal market, and we aren't yet for 100% successful in the internal market, but we are going on in the right direction.
Right.
Anyhow, free flow of capital is there. And the proposal that was made by the P&O after their disaster experience in the United States, in Europe, anyhow, were successful. They were indeed very successful in the Rotterdam port,
right.
In their container investment in the terminal, and happily so. For as a commissioner for competition, I think that now in the port of Rotterdam, competition is there, for there are more terminals for containers. And there are quite a number of other examples. The Barclay investment from the side of the Chinese, for example, is also such an example. But we need to take into account, and before there was made a difference between academic politicians and the business world, I would love that we are communicating far more than we are doing now. For no one of those has the wisdom. And I think we need each other. And talking about that, indeed, one of those points is that we need regulation. And regulation seems to be, in quite a number of situations, seen as, wrongly anyhow, perceived as a disgraced protectionism. It isn't if it is done in the right way. What am I doing in the field of regulation? What is the Commission doing in the field of regulation? General interest objectives, Mike, and are not satisfactorily attained by just relying on market forces in some cases.
Right.
For example, for consumer safety, we did have a very severe example recently with Chinese products. Let's name it.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, Jean-Pierre, when you see something like this summer's activity in relation to consumer product safety, particularly, we should be clear, particularly products that have been sourced in China, does that undermine the political and public support for free trade regimes in a significant way?
I think so. I think that, again, there's two aspects of it. One is the rules and regulations. The other one is the spirit in which the global economy is going to be moving forward. I tend to agree. I come back to Doha briefly, and I don't think we want to try and kick that horse too much. But nevertheless, I do tend to agree that it was dead before it was born. I mean, and I think that this, we have to remember that Doha took place 6 weeks or whatever it was after 9/11.
Right.
So there was a sort of artificial sort of sense, you've got to come out with something. And in that moment of, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but anyway, that special moment, came up with this idea of calling it the Doha Development Round, which with the benefit of hindsight was a huge mistake. But I think what's taken place, and this is where I come back to spirit, is that there has not been any delivery. The playing field has been tilted for a whole variety of different reasons, and I think there was an opportunity here to do it. I think the other thing that also has to be recognized is, I'm European, I have nothing, and I'm a very proud European, and so on. But it was interesting in the session this morning with Martin Wolf talking about the world economy, that the word EU wasn't mentioned once. We are seeing a change that's taking...
So you are to be blamed.
No, I don't think I have to be blamed. But I think that what, this is, Commissioner, but also what I feel fairly strongly is that we've got, you say we've got to play with our cards close to our chests, but we've got new players. They don't necessarily understand the game. And I think part of the problem is that, the GATT as it existed was dominated by 4 players who knew each other. They knew what the various signals meant.
And the world is now very different.
And now the world is very, very different. And I don't think that we're adjusting properly. And so I think that what you're seeing, I mean, again, I don't see any particularly encouraging sign right now.
Right.
So, for example, the issue of contaminated food that you mentioned, or the toys, and apparently pajamas also now, and so on. It's unfortunate, but it's unfortunate on both sides. One side, I don't know if there's members of the Chinese press here, but I've been interviewed on the subject a lot, and there's a sort of tendentious saying, isn't this another example of visceral protectionism in the Western markets?
Right.
And the answer is no. Right. I mean, people, I have pets. I don't particularly like the idea of my cat dying because of the pet food was contaminated. So I think there you have a case of justified concern, and hence the need for regulation and all the rest of it. But the very fact that this could be interpreted as a sign of protectionism shows, to my mind, the extent to which the basic trust that we should be having has on the whole broken down. So this is, the Commissioner talked about dialogue. I fully agree, and this is why events such as these are terribly important. Talk, try and build confidence, and try and, recognize that the game is a little bit different, and put your cards more on the table and openly, because there's a lot at stake.
Sorry, Kevin, come in, yeah.
Perhaps I could follow up on that a little, because I think it's, as I was saying earlier, we're at a different stage of complexity now. So you talk, Jean-Pierre, about trust breaking down. I would prefer to view it as many more people are now engaged in the global trading systems, and our expectations of each other need to be recorrelated, which, if you like, is a classic glass half full or glass half empty. And I really do feel that we're actually at a stage of greater complexity that needs more engagement in the way you've indicated. But that reflects success, the success of the last 20 years, rather than a failure today. And I think that's important in order to keep the atmosphere positive. And this is about domestic politics and global politics in every country, and having a positive attitude to trade, change, and the expectations of each other, I think, is critical.
Khalid, do you think that the new actors, the new players in the global trading system are being made to feel welcome by established forces?
Well, I'm not British, by the way, so this is not a sarcastic answer. The answer is yes. They are made to feel they are welcome until they get in. Then they are not welcome. And I think I just want to pick on Jean-Pierre's point about there were 4 players in the gap. These are the guys who are talking to each other. And suddenly they want something called globalization, want to bring the global players in. And since we are here talking about the new champions, most of the new champions actually come from the rest of the world.
Right.
They don't come from that part of the world. And these are, majority are backed by entrepreneurs. And these entrepreneurs, sooner or later, we're going to get just older and older. And there's a point where they either penetrate or they're not allowed to penetrate. You can be big in your own space, but if you are good with a product or with whatever, you want to go global, you need to be allowed to do that. And what's happening is that the 4 big players are deepening. They are basically come to you, they push you things down, where the competition is not fair. So you have an entrepreneur, I'm just simplifying it, sorry, because I'm not a politician, nor an academician, so I need to simplify this so I understand it myself, is that you've got a good entrepreneur coming from one place in part of the world which is not in the top 4, wants to dig in. He's got a fantastic product, he's not allowed to go out. Once you've got somebody from the US or Europe who've got the power and has got a product which is less good as the other guy, he can go in and it's been pressured down the throat of everybody else. So I think that is where people will start getting a bit too tense, and yes, they are welcome, but in reality they are not. So sorry for that cynical answer or sarcastic answer.
Jean-Pierre, one of the political factors that's on the horizon in the next year, of course, is the US presidential election in November 2008. It seems to me that one of the really quite salient factors of the US political scene at the moment is that there are very few leading politicians who are really nailing their colors to the mast of a free and open global trading system in the way that Bill Clinton kind of quite memorably did in 1992 when he ran for the Democratic nomination 16 years ago. Does that bother you? I mean, do you see from your European vantage point a growing sense of protectionism in the US, dressed up sometimes in consumer product, sometimes in national security, but a general trend towards more protectionism in the US?
If I could just pick up on what Kevin has said, I mean, there's no doubt that the achievements over the course of the last couple of decades have been remarkable.
Right.
And they're sitting in a place like Dalian, and you think 20 years back, this would have been absolutely unimaginable. So the world has changed dramatically. The world has changed dramatically for the better. Of that, there's no doubt whatsoever from the geopolitical point of view, economic point of view, the problem is that this is not necessarily the perception.
Right.
So that, you're saying, we live in a much better atmosphere, yes, but somehow or other surveys are indicating to us that 70% of Americans believe that they're worse off now than they were 2 decades ago. We have a comparable phenomenon in my country, in France, again, which, has been pointed out, benefits enormously from globalization, but where 70% or more of the French are opposed to it. The referendum in the Netherlands against the EU constitution has been interpreted, whether rightly or wrongly, and I'm not going to comment on the Netherlands situation, as also a sort of sense of, so there is, if you like, a sense of dissatisfaction, and maybe because we've sold it badly. Now, from a politician's point of view, are you going to go to the 30% or are you going to play to the 70%?
Right.
Obviously, it's like Sarkozy, let's see what happens. I'm a little bit worried, I think justifiably. Now, he's made very protectionist noises. My wife, who's less worried than I am, but she's usually wrong, has said that, in France, you cannot possibly get elected if you mention the word. When I say in France I'm a liberal, it's coming out of the closet sort of big time. So, and the sense one can make is that maybe we're seeing rhetoric in order to get elected, whether it's Sarkozy or whether it's Clinton or Obama or Edwards or whoever it may be, and that once elected, a greater degree of pragmatism will quit. Inshallah. I mean, I hope this will be the scene. What I do see is, I think in Europe there is a possibility. I think that we have potentially a different scene here with Angela Merkel, Gordon Brown, who's I think more interested in the trade agenda than Tony Blair was. Sarkozy, remains to be seen, but at least there's room for doubt, which is good, that we could be looking towards a more open economic agenda in Europe to try to influence the United States. But as I say, this is a lot of inshallahs have to be thrown in there.
Yeah, Nellis, please.
Mike, just a couple of remarks, facts and figures. When I listen to some of the statements, a dramatic change of the world, it is a challenge. Come on, it is positive. It is not negative at all. Globalization is, by the way, a fact. No one can change it anymore. So react on that challenge. Having said that, sold it badly. Let's forget to sell. Let's communicate. And let's explain what's all about. And let's explain, for example, and that is indeed mentioned rightly by Jean-Pierre, that we have a bad experience in the country I pretend to know best. And what is in a one-liner, the background, we didn't communicate what was all in for every citizen in the Netherlands. And that is not bad to explain what's in for you and what can be in for the other one. So if that is the case with 27 member states in Europe, it's never proven before in the whole history of the world that 27 members in 27 countries in Europe are together, one internal market, free flow of capital, free flow of goods, free flow of persons. Where can you find it? 500 million people working together. That means that we can prove that this uniting the member states has just created millions of jobs. And indeed, you can explain in facts and figures what it means. Globalization is nearby the same, but people are anxious. People are not aware what's all about. It is my job. It is, and we should explain and communicate what's all about. That is what I'm doing in the People's Republic of China. For I am absolutely aware that with the anti-monopoly law just approved in the People's Congress, that is the first step. And then I can say, it's not enough. Come on, it's the first step. It is great. And now we have to push that they are implementing that system in the right way, that it is indeed open and what have you. Having said that, no national champions. And that is what I'm fighting like hell in Europe, and I'm fighting like hell on the global scene. National champions is a wording outdated. It is from the last century. And now it is, anyhow, for a European commissioner, it is a European champion, or much better, a global champion. And could it be located in Europe? That would be the best. But having said that, I think that one question is absolutely main, and that is, do we need, with globalization, an agreement between the team players in that game? Right. Do we need a Doha result? If not, then, well, I couldn't care less making it that or whatever. But I think that the alternative of a multilateral agreement, and that is Doha, is bilateral. I don't like bilaterals if there is a possibility of having a multilateral. For bilaterals means that we are making a deal, you are making a deal, and I'm not aware what your deal is all about. So let's just do our utmost.
And it should be said that the cost for businesses of a network, of a spaghetti bowl of bilateral deals are astonishing, because you have to kind of try and keep track of not one system of rules, but many, many, many. But I was interested in your point on your argument against national champions, and presumably there are interesting conversations with the new French government on that, which we can pick up in
yes,
another
but
session.
that is interesting too. For of course, I also have that type of discussions with members of the French government, right. And then they are a bit double. Some are not, by the way. So if I am coming with facts and figures, how many investments they are doing outside France, then it's great. And when with the former government, anyhow, the yogurt company, Danone, is in the play, then it is a national jewel or whatever. Come on, yogurt is very important, but it's not a national jewel.
Good point. Let's take some questions from the floor. I've got a couple of other rounds of things that I'd like to get our panelists to talk on, but we've had a very lively debate, and I'd like to see if we can kind of open it up to some questions. Yes, lady in the pink, right there. Just wait. A microphone will be on your way. Please say who you are.
Okay, my name is Idria Ahmed Adeshida, and I work with Shoreline Energy International, which is a Nigerian company. I don't mean to take you back, but we started this discussion with Doha. And I think often when you talk about globalization, we're talking, it's a word that connotes, everybody being involved, etc., etc. But often Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, gets left behind because the issues that we face are totally different. It's not necessarily always about getting our goods into markets. It's also about trying to attract the right kind of investment into our markets. And I mean, apart from sort of the traditional areas, the traditional sectors, oil and gas, minerals, it's really hard to get companies to come to Africa and invest in services, in all the things. And I understand that there are risks. But the truth is that their very presence is likely to act as a catalyst for change and would in some ways also negate some of the problems that are there. So because this is a new champions meeting, I'm just basically saying, these new champions, maybe you shouldn't be looking to Europe and the United States and China. Maybe you should be looking at other regions like Africa.
Any comments on that, other than to agree?
Sorry, perhaps just quickly, I mean, I agree with your sentiments totally. I think one of the things that one has to be clear about is the demographics of this planet over the course of the next coming decades. And Africa's population is going to roughly double to about 1.5 billion in the course of the next 30 or 40 years or thereabouts. And for globalization to be able to function, it's not just a question of new champions, it's got to be inclusive. It's got to be inclusive. Africa has to be brought in to this particular, because and this is a stain, if you like. And this is why the idea of a development round could have been a good idea. But as I say, that idea unfortunately has disappeared.
Right. Gentleman here.
My name is Martin Schöller Group. I'm also on the board of Europe's 500 Organization of European Growth Entrepreneurs. I would like to advocate that we should think to substitute protectionism for areas and industries by protectionism for social and environmental standards, and thereby create incentives for countries wanting to trade with Europe, with the US, with Japan here, to implement stronger social and environmental standards, getting a more level playing field of competition on the one hand, and creating additional demand in their countries on the other hand.
Kelly?
Well, I think I fully agree with that. In that case, I think most of the American companies, the big ones, and some of the Japanese and some of the Europeans will lose out to the new champions, because when we really look at the basically carbon emission today, I'm since talking about an environmental issue, most of it comes from basically the northern countries. It doesn't come from the new champions. So I think in that case, if it's a level playing field, then we all welcome that. And I think that's a great idea, and we should do that.
Right. Yes, gentleman here. Just wait 1 second for a microphone.
Hi, my name is Asad Umar from Pakistan, and the question is that we're talking about the failure of the trade round, the Doha round. Can we really resolve our global trading issues without resolving the fundamental issue of the global power structure as it sits today, as represented through the permanent membership of the Security Council, through the G8 membership, through the leadership of institutions like the World Bank and IMF? So don't we need to change that overall reality, and without changing that, trade on its own can't be resolved?
Khalid, you were smiling as the question was...
Well, actually, just to come to that, I think I see some of my Indian friends here, and the worst thing was this Indian-Brazilian discussion which they had, which went down. I mean, we were hoping that India and Brazil will come together on this issue, because we do need that. We all agree, coming from the part of the world that we come from, we want to see the change. I mean, we see, whether we like it or not, United States runs the United Nations. A lot of us would disagree, the Europeans, but I think people come from our part of the world would say that's the case, because that's the way we see it. Whether we like it or not, unfortunately, 30% of the world economy comes from the United States. So I think it's an important thing that we see the factors of the new players coming in. But it's a chicken and egg exercise. To get in, you've got to be competitive. You've got to be part of that. The other side has to allow you in. So it's a two-way. So as much as I'm hammering the Europeans and the Americans, I think there's a lot of burden on us coming from that part of the world that we push through. And we gotta basically prove ourselves and get there.
More questions, and then I want to ask something. But lady in the second row here, and then at the back. Yeah, here first.
Thank you. My name is Bridget Cosgrave. I'm with Belgacom, the state-owned government and telephone company in Belgium. Given the global capital markets crisis has generated a flight to quality, and at the same time we still see significant amounts of capital, whether it be sovereign funds or private equity funds or other source of funds available for investment. When we look at still very high levels of state ownership in companies, not just in Europe, but in some other geographies, including some of the new growth areas, are we not missing a big opportunity for further privatizations?
Kevin, do you see a wave of privatization around the... I'm not sure I do, but I mean...
I don't think in the near term there's going to be, as a matter of prediction, a huge further steps in privatization. But again, I will come back to what I've said before, which is the enormous change in the last 20 years that's been positive for the trading economy of the world, the financial and economic economies of the world. But we're at a stage of development now where the complexity is, if you like, hit us. And in terms of the other questions and comments from people, the countries of the world, the companies of the world are at different stages of development and have different needs, objectives on which they're focused. And bringing those needs together in a coherent way that enables us to continue deal with the globalization trend in a positive way for the whole of the world community is a very challenging process, and I think that's what we're all agreed on. And that, that thinking about that in that way, I think, brings together so many of the themes. We cannot operate in a global economy dealing with participants in many different countries on the basis that they are operating from the same economic fundamentals as each of us have in a very small domestic situation, whether it's Europe or the US or the Western trading world. So it's incumbent on managers and business people to understand all the participants in the supply chain, what their objectives are, their stage of development, and manage it accordingly. And because I suspect a lot of those issues, product quality issues, are not protectionist. I suspect they're to do with problems of management.
Yep. I'm sure. Nelly, yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Two remarks. Number one, just adding to the remark that has been made, is it when you are safety regulations putting at the table, is that close to protectionism or anti-dumping? No, no, no. Absolutely not. Why not? Because protectionism is completely different, but we need, and that is one of those cases, we need rules and regulations for food safety, for we don't even talking about the pets, but also talking about our children or ourselves. We don't want to have food or whatever product that is not good for our health. And so rules and regulations for food safety, rules and regulations for the environmental issues, no doubt about that. They won't be in conflict with the principle of an open and competitive business environment as long as, and that is absolutely straightforward, within a given market, there is no discrimination within that market. Right. Having said that, I think that also talking about state-owned companies, we also have state-owned companies in the European Union. Anyhow, the shareholder is the state in certain cases. I always say, as a commissioner for competition, at the end of the day, I'm not, if there is a merger proposed to the European Commission, I'm not interested in the nationality of the parties, I'm not interested in the size of the parties, I'm even not interested in the shareholdership. I'm interested if that combination is playing a level, fair playing field role, and if it is not attacking competition. That's all about. So also the state-owned companies, also in this country, in our opinion, needs to follow the rules and regulations, that it is indeed non-discriminatory playing the game.
But if I can just kind of put myself on the panel just for a second, I mean, not every public official worldwide is perhaps as thoughtful as you are. One of the things that's been very evident in the US in the last few months during the consumer product safety issues has been to see the way in which people have used an occasional recall on entirely justifiable on consumer product grounds as a way of attacking the whole idea of outsourcing manufacturing to China. I mean, it's become a political issue.
Mike, sometimes I'm hesitating if I am a politician, but having said that, I think that it's quite important if you want to have a situation in which it's not a threat. And right. I get that point, and it's all about emotion in most cases. Right. Then find a good tool for it. So if we think that in certain cases that type of investments is an attack to our democratic system, for example, take the good rules and take the good regulations, but not say it is indeed only the way to protect ourselves to close the fortress. No way. And then we are...
I'd just actually like to pick on the question about the current turmoil. I mean, the current turmoil in the markets and the tightening by the banks actually gives fantastic opportunity for the Indian, Chinese and Middle Eastern money to pick up acquisitions in the United States and Europe. Some very, very good deals today. So money talks at the end of the day. I think protectionism, when you are a slow economy, you always protect. But today, because you have a problem, it's very difficult in terms of, I'm not talking about privatization, I'm talking about basically companies which are there in the market. There are some excellent buys in the near future. So I think that you see a lot of the money from Asia and Middle East going to Europe and US in terms of acquiring some very good deals.
And it's a win-win.
It's a win-win situation.
I've got two questions. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ata Mutambara from Zimbabwe. I'm very interested to hear the views of the panelists on the notion of sovereignty. It's my submission that we can never effectively build regional integration and regional trading blocks unless we define what we mean by sovereignty. It's my submission that we need to move from national sovereignty to regional sovereignty which supersedes national sovereignty. And beyond that, we need to move to global sovereignty, which then supersedes regional sovereignty and national sovereignty. What is the logical conclusion of globalization? Is there a thing that we need to define as regional sovereignty and global sovereignty?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, I mean, intellectually, you're absolutely right. I think I think the challenge of sovereignty is in part about managing gains and losses and the sense of community. And I think Jean-Pierre talked about, and some of the participants from the floor talked about unequal shares in globalization, and that is one of the sources of pressure. But sovereignty only helps us if there's a real sense of community, so that the losers accept that they're losing relative to the gainers, and yet the society as a whole is stronger. And I think that's where the challenge of regionalization, and we've seen that as Europe has built, I think, because, you know, in the UK, in my own country, somehow or other people in Glasgow accepted that people in London did better. Not all, you know, it's always complex, but somehow or other that worked. But when you start seeing, I don't know, you know, France, Paris doing better than Glasgow or London, then different issues come to play. The sense of community isn't there. But I think what has been achieved in Europe is a greater sense of community and a readiness to accept losses and gains, you know, unevenly spread. And that's how you get there is as much about social understanding as anything.
Jean-Pierre, you want to come in?
Yes, I just want to build on this. I think one of the things that's extremely important, I mean, we should be going in the direction that you're talking about on the basis of gains and losses, and to see, you know, how we can all benefit from giving up elements of sovereignty in order to spread the economic wealth more generally. But what's very important, I think the main lesson from Europe is that Europe was able to build up a sense of community through an intense sense of dialogue, trust building that took place over the decades. I was born at the very end of World War II. I think when I was born, it would have been absolutely unthinkable that we would be having the European Union that we have today. Now, the thing is that these things don't happen automatically. You work on them. And people, particularly of my parents' generation and my generation, worked on it very hard to build a sense of European community, and that is the underpinning for the other things that can exist. I think this is lacking in many other regions. And for example, so far, you know, people talk about the possibility of a free trade area of the Asia Pacific or whatever. And the point I keep making, particularly to the Japanese, is that, you know, they've got to work at building the sense of trust and community and confidence in the region. Otherwise, I think you're building things on wet sand and not on solid foundations.
Very, very good point. There's a question just in here.
So, can I talk in Chinese?
Yes.
Sorry.
The answer to that is certainly you can.
我选择用中文来说那个。
Wait, but not so fast.
Okay. First one, yeah. First channel first. Okay. Yeah. 我选择用中文说啊，和民族主义无关。我觉得在这个会议上应该有不同的声音啊。我听了这个今天呢，咱们谈论了很多，比如说提到了中国的这个玩具的问题，啊，那就是谈论这个问题，我觉得它的潜台词是什么？就是我们仍然把中国认为是一个主要的一个出口的国家，啊，就是我们在 外国人的心目中可能就是我们就是单纯的出口产品，我觉得这个想法，我觉得应该得到修正。我觉得中国现在应该是不仅仅是输出产品，而更多是从全球输入一些服务，就是他要买很多的服务。中国现在有很多的企业已经从原来的加工型企业，比如我们是中国最大的西服出口商我们是做这个高端西服的，但是我们现在的我们的重心已经移向了品牌，我们要打造国际化的男装的高档的品牌那么我们要开发我们自己的品牌呢，我们就需要什么呢？整合全球的优势的资源。Okay. So my question is, 当咱们谈论这个话题的时候，你们觉得中国呢，它应该是成为一个全球发展中一个负责任的一个国家，它也想不单是有出口，它也想有更多的进口。那么这块儿，觉得在这个全球这个贸易这个当中，外部的世界应该是不是和中国要有一个更好的有关？中国下一步他想向这个品牌经济发展的时候，是不是他需要一些什么服务？他需要外部给予一些什么服务的输出？是不是咱们应该这个会议？我觉得下一次咱们在谈论这个全球贸易的时候，应该转向这个方向。这个是我的想法。我不知道这个各位嘉宾是怎么认为的？我想问一下这个问题。
Anyone want to take that? Other than to agree. Yeah, Nelly.
I couldn't agree more, but therefore it's so important that your new anti-monopoly law, just approved, will be implemented in the way that we indeed can trust that there is a fair level playing field. Both sides, open markets, giving the opportunities to investment, as well the Chinese money into the rest of the world and the other way around, as well with products and services. So it is quite important the year to come that it is implemented and that the enforcement is correctly in the same line as the competition policy is in Europe, is in the United States, is in Australia and wherever.
Thank you all very much for an hour's worth of very stimulating, very lively discussion on international trade issues. Thanks to our audience too for some terrific questions. Please give all our panelists a round of applause before you get on for lunch. Thanks.